love the money. And I love the fact that most of the people watching probably want my life. I'm Donovan Phillips, and I'm a porn producer. There's nothing I like better than meeting someone that I'd known growing up. And when they asked what I was doing for a living, I'd say I'm a porn producer. And they'd just kind of snicker and laugh like, yeah, right, it's a funny joke. And I'd be like, no, seriously, I'm a porn producer. Inside, I was just really having a hard time continuing. And I was like almost ready to explode. I was just, you know, miserable. I mean, that's really the only word to describe it. We were contractors for Playboy, and one day I was sitting in their office, and they'd offered us a new contract. And the contract was for $4,000 a day. I was just ecstatic about the money. On the way back from their office, I started praying to God, because I've been doing a lot of praying recently, and I says, you know what, God, it seems like Christians are completely wrong, because it doesn't seem to matter what I do. You want to bless me, it seems. And right after that, I felt electricity go through my body. It was like almost an electric shock, and it wasn't like, it wasn't really, didn't come in the form of punishment or anything like that. It came more as a form of, you know, I've got a whole lot more for you than this. So I pulled my car over to the side of the road, and my hands were shaking, and I just said, man, I'm not doing this anymore. And I quit on the day that we were offered more money. And I wasn't ready to accept Jesus as my Savior or to return the surrender of my life to God. But I called up Craig Gross from XXX Church, and I says, I'm done, you know, I'm out. And I said, I still have a lot of questions that don't make any sense about God and the Bible, and I'm not ready to surrender my life to Him yet. But 2 weeks later, I was returning once again, and I just said, God, you know, I'm just going to trust that you're going to answer all the different questions and doubts and problems that I have in my mind, and I'm just going to surrender all of this to you and trust you to help me. And right there in my car, 2 weeks after I quit shooting porn, I surrendered my life to God.
I mean, just today, we found out that Donny Pauling is going to go to seminary. Well, he was shooting porn last year. He's going to graduate seminary in 2 years from now, become a pastor, and who knows what that guy's going to go on to do. So this was never just about getting him to stop porn. That was just the very beginning.
They spelled, are we on? There we go. Yeah, they spelled my name wrong in that video. That was spelled. That always bugs me when I see that. When I was in the porn world, I became intimately familiar with the way that porn affects the models involved and the people involved and the destruction inside the industry. But one thing that I never really learned until I started talking at churches like this is how it affected people's families. It had never even been a consideration. And as I travel now and speak, I've had people come up, usually women, who say, this really destroyed my entire family. I am no longer with my husband over this. Or men who have come up and told me, you know, what they gave up because of their porn addiction. And I can identify with that, because I'm going to tell you later some of the things I lost. But when a woman emailed me not long ago asking for help and wondering what to do because her husband's porn addiction was just ripping her apart, it was this passionate letter, and I didn't know what to say in response. So I forwarded it to my ex-wife, who was a Christian girl who had lived her faith and whose life I ripped apart. And we have now since become best friends, but there's no restoration there of our marriage. But she still is a person that I go to in situations like this, and I wasn't really anticipating her response. And she even says that this isn't the right response. But I wanted to read it for you anyway, because I think it maybe will paint a picture. It says,
Donny, you don't understand. It hurts so much just to read this letter. And all I feel like I could give her is to say, run, run, run. Run away, far away. It's adultery in the most painful form. It's ongoing because it's not a real affair. So it's like trying to work through a marriage one-sided. While he's having this continual affair, you're trying to work through it. How is that fair? Tell me, how is that okay? How can I try to give women tools to work through it? How can I tell them to try to rebuild something with someone who's not doing their part? It's so one-sided. All I want to tell these women is to leave, and that isn't right. God needs to deal with each situation on an individual basis, and they need to hear from him what they're supposed to do. But how can their marriage survive? To me, it can't. If he doesn't quit, it'll tear them apart. How come this should be her burden is what I wonder. The very thing he's stabbing her heart with and tearing their family apart with and their children or whomever is the very thing she's supposed to help him through? As Christians, is that what we're called to do? Stand by his side and be a faithful warrior on his behalf when he is so selfish he would sacrifice his wife and children for photographs and fantasy? I truly don't even know. I don't get it. I just don't get it. Her statement, my husband's addiction is stripping away all that I am. And it seems like wives are a lost casualty in this war. They kill me because I know. For me, divorcing you was getting out of all of it. It was freedom. I didn't have to continue being torn apart. I could get strong and rebuild my life. While you're in it, your heart is ripped to shreds over and over and over again. I don't know how to counsel someone that's going through that. I'm angry and I have no understanding for this level of selfishness. Who knows, maybe if wives left their husbands, men would see reality. The reality of the fact is that it is an affair, and their wives shouldn't have to put up with the abuse, just like they shouldn't have to put up if there were physical abuse. How is it different? Emotional wounds hurt more than physical ones. Let him have his porn, because that's obviously what he wants, and he can't have both. I just don't have the answers at this point. Read the Old Testament when Israel was unfaithful to God. See what he did and see if you get any insight. Wendy. And people, whether you're a man or a woman, we're putting people through horrible emotional pain for a complete lie. And I want to tell you a little bit more about that. I started off as a pastor's son. My dad pastored in a very legalistic organization. And God was a list of rules and regulations and things that you can't do for me. There was no TV, you can't do this, you can't do that. It was all a sin that was all going to send you to hell. And I don't really hold that against my parents because it's really all that they knew. But what I think they did do that was a mistake is they talked within earshot of my brother and I about some of the things that were going on in the church. And so these people who you see up on stage, who are these spiritual leaders, and then you hear about what's really happening in their lives and how horrible they are. I used to tell people that all the 9 years that I was in the porn world, I never met anyone who was any worse than some of the Christians I met in my father's church. And that's absolutely true. And so I started hating Christians and Christianity and God because I was confusing God with the people that claimed to represent him. And I could see that now, but I couldn't then. And I was fueled by that bitterness and anger. And I wanted nothing to do with it. I wanted actually the opposite. But my senior year in high school, I moved out of my dad's house and in with my aunt to take a calculus course that wasn't offered in the little town he pastored in. And I met Wendy, and she was a real Christian. She had been raised differently than me. She knew Jesus on a personal level. And I thought that I had at one time, but I really hadn't. But she lived her faith, and so for her sake, I tried. And I did all the things I thought I was supposed to do. And we were married 4 years later. After dating 4 years, she was still a virgin. And that was all her doing because I tried to change that. But she wasn't having any of it. And so as a married man, I tried to do what I thought I was supposed to do. I went to church. I went to prayer meetings. I met with the men on Tuesday mornings at 0:30 and prayed. But it wasn't real to me. And so when a computer entered into my house and I started looking at internet porn, I started seeing something that I was not only finding very appealing, but something I could make money in. Because I was one of these types of people who was always looking for a way to make more money. Tried Amway, tried other multi-level marketing, whatever it was. You know, my background was a computer science major, and that still wasn't enough. But when I found porn, I knew I could make money in that. And so I started up a company called Pauling Technology Consulting. And my wife thought that I was building networks and programming computers and fixing them. Thank you, Bill Gates, for all the fixing that's necessary on our computers. But I wasn't. And she didn't ask very many questions because that stuff didn't interest her. And so I was hiding for 3 years what I was doing. And I kind of kept it constrained because we lived in a town that wasn't that big. And I didn't want it to get out. So I kept it constrained, and I'm still making money. But one day, I came clean with my wife, 3 years into it. And ladies, imagine what it would feel like if you found out that for 3 years, your husband had been living a total, complete lie. Like, what was true? All that stuff that's happened in the past 3 years, what part of that was actually true? So when I say that I ripped my wife's life apart and I ripped her heart out, I ripped her heart out. And so she obviously kicked me out of the house. And I moved into my office and started sleeping on the floor of my office. And I quickly found another girlfriend because my ego wouldn't take being alone. It's actually insecurity. That's usually what ego is. And this girl was raised in what I call the porn generation. She was 8 years younger than me, and she'd been raised in a society where we glamorize Paris Hilton, and when she makes a porn video, she becomes famous. And we have our kids running around our elementary schools with shirts on that say porn, and then have a big star underneath it, like being a porn star is something cool. And we watch television programs that are basically porn with clothes on, and they're sitting beside mom and dad while they're watching it, so it must be okay. And that made it very easy for me to start recruiting. And Belinda, the new girlfriend that I found, she was totally cool with it because porn had always defined for her what sex was. So now that I'm open to create this stuff without having to hide, the very first month, I made $50,350 and I was hooked. I mean, this was great. Not only could I make an enormous amount of money, but I could act out that hatred towards Christ, doing something completely opposite. And we lived this fast life where we would take the first half of the month and work, and take the last half of the month off and spend it. Make and spend. Enormous amounts of money, partying, having a good time, saying that someday we'll save because porn's never going away, and when we have kids, we'll settle down, get married, save up. But that started to catch up with me because I started seeing the destruction come in the lives of these girls that I was involving in this business. And people sometimes ask me, what about the guys? Well, there are stories of guys who have horrible things happen to them in the industry too, but they just don't seem to talk about it as much. But these models, they thought that we were their friends because the way that I recruited is I'd invite them over to my house. We lived in a nice place. We had photos with famous people. We had all these pictures of things that we had done that were fun, and they start painting themselves into that picture. And they start thinking that porn can give them all this. And besides, it's cool. I could work for $500 a day for Donny or for 2 weeks at Starbucks and bring home $200. So it wasn't very difficult in this time that we live in where porn's so glamorized. It wasn't a hard decision to make. And I recruited the likes of pastors' daughters, Chico State University professors who thought that it was a free speech issue. And so that she was waiting for someone to challenge her decision to work for me because she wanted to show them that free speech allows us to do it. And that's true, but just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that we should ever legislate against free speech because legislation doesn't change hearts. Education and Jesus changes hearts. So it wouldn't be 2 weeks after a girl would work for us that her life would start falling apart because we contracted with some pretty well-known companies. The last 2 years, our biggest company that we contracted with was Playboy. And people think that Playboy is just softcore porn. It's just a magazine. But that's not true. Playboy owns some of the most hardcore porn sites on the internet. If they were just a soft magazine, they wouldn't survive. And they hide it under a different company name, but when you go to their financials, you see that company listed as one of their assets. And their sites that they have are so out there that I can't even repeat the names of them in the church. But Playboy is nowhere near just soft. And people don't realize that to get up into that magazine that every girl seems to think she wants to be in, There's a whole lot of other steps that you got to take first. So we would recruit these brand new girls, and people think that people that are involved in porn must be broken. And that's not the case. They become broken, but I was recruiting college girls who maybe already had their degree or were working towards it. And like I mentioned, pastors' daughters. I loved that. Wow, what better way to just kind of stick it to religion. And I would be walking along and meet someone from one of my father's churches, and I would see a person, and you do that catch-up conversation. You know how it always goes something like, well, what are you doing? Oh, I'm doing blah, blah, blah. What are you doing? How are the kids? Et cetera, et cetera. And if they didn't ask me what I was doing, I would ask them, because I knew that in response they'd ask me back. And I lived for the moment when I could say I was a porn producer. I wanted to stick it to them. And they'd laugh at first. I'm a porn producer. Ah, ha, ha, that's funny. No, seriously, I'm a porn producer. And a lot of these people from this legalistic environment, they wanted to say something to me about it, and I could see it in their face. And it always happened. They were so predictable. And I'd always stop them, and I'd say, hey, wait a second. Before you go into me with whatever it is that you're wanting to say, let me ask you a question. And please don't answer, because I don't want to hear you lie. Do you consume porn, or have you ever consumed porn? Because if you have, we're all in this together. There's this law of supply and demand, and without you and people like you producing the demand, I couldn't be making money in it. So we're in it together. Now, what was it that you were wanting to say to me? And that would usually end the conversation, and it was done in the wrong attitude, but you know what? The truth of that is still real. It doesn't matter where we get our porn, pay sites or free sites, it's all part of the cycle. Those free sites are some of the biggest money makers on the internet. I used to advertise on one. The first 15 text links were $2,000 a day each. And all that money goes back into the porn industry, to more broken lives. What do you mean by broken lives? Well, let me share a few of them with you. First of all, I recruited somewhere close to 500 brand new faces in the business in my 9 years. And not one of them has ever come back to me and thanked me for getting them involved. But repeatedly, over and over again, I hear back about the destruction that it's caused. I hear back about girls one girl was working at Hewlett-Packard, and they let her go because they found out about her past with me, and it violated their morality clause. There was another girl that she had always wanted to be a police officer, and halfway through the academy, they called her in and let her go because they found out what she had done for me. There was another girl who her father was walking out of the office with his buddies, maybe going to drink a beer, I don't know. But they get to his car and it's covered with photos of his daughter. And another model who she gets to her college campus, and on all the trees there's stapled images of her. And she talks about the humiliation that caused. We thought it was so cool when we're making the $500 a day, and I was justifying that by saying, they signed a 5-page model release. They knew what they were getting into. They're adults making adult decisions. And that's all true, but it still doesn't absolve me of the guilt and the responsibility for what I did, because I had a little bigger picture. I'm going to share another story. Another few stories, actually. There's a girl named Karma. I recruited her into the business. She was 18 years old. She was beautiful. I knew she'd make a lot of money, so I created a website that was all her. And she received 25% of the profit. And so she's soon making $10,000 a month, and she's living this life, and she has no idea what to do with this kind of money because she's not mature enough to handle it. So she starts partying a lot. And when she's passed out at parties, men think that since she's a porn star, they could take what they want. And she has a child that she has no idea who the father is. And I know that this is hard stuff, but you know what? This is the reality. This is part of what I want to share with you, because I think that the reality of porn replaces the fantasy. You think that what's happening on the screen is so appealing, and people ask, how come are you attracted to it? And no, I'm not, because, the porn companies, they don't tell you about the models that are curled up in a ball in the corner, sucking their thumbs in between takes because they're so blown in their mind by what's happening to them. And they don't put a disclaimer in the credits about the surgeries that were needed to repair the damage done to the girl's body by the scene that you just watched. You just see the final edited cut where the director has screamed over and over and over again at the girl to get it right or she's not getting paid. And some of them didn't even know what it was going to happen to them when they show up that day. But they've come there expecting money, and they're not going to leave without it. so we're just going to get tough and get through it. And we sell our families for this. I sold my wife and my 1-year-old child for money in an industry that is so fake. Nothing on the screen is real. So no, I don't struggle with porn. Because it's not what it seems, ever. Sure, there might be times when a girl at the beginning of her career for the first few weeks thinks it's fun, but that quickly goes away, and you can watch the light drain out of their eyes over the course of just weeks. And it was heartbreaking, even when I was in it, but I kept on fueling it by that excuse I made to myself. You know, they know what they're getting into. And I kept that hatred inside towards Christianity as a way to keep on fueling myself, whatever it took. And the reason that we kept on partying is because we were trying to fill that emptiness. You know, we'd work that first half of the month, and then we'd spend the last half of the month trying to forget. But one year, as I was walking down the convention halls in Las Vegas, the porn industry, by the way, has conventions all across the world. All around the world. The biggest one is in Las Vegas every year. And basically you go to one of these conventions and it's like anything else. They have booths displaying their products. They have people running around. There's loud music. They're trying to make it a big party. And the girls aren't really wearing much and they're handing things out and giving it to you. And it happens to be the same week as the Consumer Electronics Show. So there's 200,000 people in town just for that show alone. And a lot of them are going to come right over into our show because they're right next door. And so you have these girls walking around. And I always made the Vegas show. It was my favorite show. So I'm walking down the hallway past the Christians who are holding the picket signs, telling us that we're going to go to hell and how badly it's going to burn once we got there. And I would flip them off, and I would give them the ability to fuel my rage more towards Christians. Because what are we thinking when we do something like that? Who wants to be married to a person that you're scared into loving? But we think we could scare people into loving Jesus? How does that work? All it did was just fuel our anger and bitterness. But I get inside the show this one year, and there's this group called XXX Church in there. And this is the booth, not the same year that I met them, because I didn't have a camera with me that year, but this is their booth at the porn show. And it says, Jesus loves porn stars. And they hand out these Bibles that say Jesus loves porn stars on them. And on the back it says, does Jesus really love porn stars? Absolutely. That might go against anything that you've ever heard about Jesus, but it's true. Jesus loves porn stars as much as he loves pastors, soccer moms, liars, thieves, and prostitutes. We're all the same to Jesus. We're all just people who need God to save us from the mess that we're in and lead us to a better way. And that first year, though, they just had a booth that said XXX Church on it, and it had a bunny standing out there, this rabbit. It turns out that Craig Gross was a youth pastor, and they'd stole Rex the rabbit from the children's ministry. And Craig put his wife inside of it, and people would come up and get their picture taken with Rex the rabbit and give him a chance to talk to him about Jesus. And the Bibles now, though, that they give out, there's a stack. Now, this picture right here, what's happening is one of those girls that I mentioned that are hired by the porn companies to walk around, she's actually wearing some clothes in this one, but they had these makeup artists from XXX Church standing there. And they're doing her makeup, and they're telling her that she's beautiful. And they're telling her that there's nothing that she could ever do that would make God love her any less. And if she needs someone to talk to, then we're here for you. And the first year I met them, I was very angry because I thought these guys were just a group of Christians who had finally figured out an excuse to come into our convention with us because they wanted to be around our lifestyle. But over the next several years, I learned otherwise. And no matter how much venom I would spew at them, because now I had a figurehead to spew all that on, and I was horrible to them, and they always responded in love, even when they had to kick me off of their website. I'm the only person in history that they've ever had to do that to. And that's because I would go there and I'd post links to my porn sites. And they would say, we love you. We invite you to be here. But there's people that come here to our site who are struggling with porn and looking for help. And we just can't let you try to, trip them up. But you're welcome. If you'd like to stop posting the links, come on back. And they would have their pastors call me once in a while out of the blue, see how I'm doing. They had me on their podcast before when I was still in the business, and it's actually still up there. Some of you have heard it because I've had people come up and tell me, I heard that podcast you did for XXX Church when you were still in Porn World. And that started messing with my head because it wasn't the legalistic, judgmental type of Christian that I'd always been raised around. And I started thinking, if I was a Christian, this is the kind of Christian I'd want to be, and this is the kind of Jesus I'd want to serve. And it was weird because the anger would start slowly going away over the course of time. And it didn't happen instantly. It took years. But it did happen. And once that anger and bitterness was gone, I couldn't justify what I was doing anymore. I want to go back, though, when we're talking about Rex the Rabbit, one thing I think it's important for you to know is that at the end of the day, these girls who are painted up and walking around, you know what they wanted? They wanted a picture with Rex the Rabbit. And you know why? Because inside they're little girls. They're somebody's daughters, someone's sister that we're objectifying on screen, believing the fantasy that they're paid to portray. A lot of them hate men. But this Jesus that they started learning with XXX Church has let a lot of them out. And since I've become a Christian, the same thing has happened. I've purposefully looked for former models so that I could apologize. And a lot of them will say, what made you change? And I would tell them about Jesus. And several of them have actually become Christians and are now attending church and finding peace and healing. One girl said, I've hated you for so long. And I did an interview with her so that everybody could listen to it. I put it on my website, actually. She's like, I hated you for so long. I mean, I realized I was responsible for my part, but I hated you for so long. To kind of show you, I received an email from a model once. I want to share this before I move on. She had only done softcore porn. She'd never done anything hardcore. And what I mean by softcore is alone. Whatever she might be doing, she's doing it alone. Hardcore is interaction with another person. But all she had done is photographs that were softcore in nature. And she writes me, Hey, Donny, I have a huge problem. I'm getting married in a month, and my fiancé found my pictures on the internet. He is beside himself. He is hurt and shocked. And being that we're supposed to tie the knot in less than a month, I'm frickin' suicidal, frickin' sick over this. Throwing up, cannot sleep at all. I never thought in a million years that would ever happen. How long do those pictures circulate? I'm seriously pissed. I know I did them, and yes, it was my fault, but I want to get it off the internet. Is there any way possible to do that ASAP? I will pay you the money back, whatever it takes. This will and is ruining my life. I am fearful that his friends will see and torture him about it, or the people I work with in the military, who are all men. I'm absolutely sick over this. I can't eat or sleep, and I honestly don't know what to do. I swear to you, I never thought in a million years that this would happen. I mean, there are a million frickin' girls on the internet. Why me? And because you're supposed to be a changed man into God and everything, please, I need to know that you're understanding my situation and find it in your heart to help me. This is destroying me. I'm 100% responsible for taking them. Yes, it was my fault, but it was years ago. I was a single woman, and I needed the money. Isn't there anything you can do to help me now? Why are my pics still on the damned internet? My military career and soon-to-be marriage, if he still will, is riding on this. Don't they expire after a certain time and you just put new ones up or sell new ones to companies to flesh out old girls? I think you can read the desperation in this email. I'm completely desperate, Donny, and I need your help. Can you help me? Please, I need everything removed. What can we do? I'll pay you money, anything. Please, say you can help me, please. And I can't help her because emails like this are not rare. The porn companies get them all the time, and they're not going to remove it. They'd have no product left to sell. And when she's old and gray, her grandkids will still be able to find them and talk about what Granny did. Porn is not harmless. And every one of us that consume it play a part in that. Because in surveys that we do, where Christians can remain anonymous, 54% of pastors admit to struggling with pornography, 90% of Christian men in general, and 70% of Christian women. So this isn't a problem that's out there with those people. It's in here with us. And there are millions of Christians in this country, and if we would just stop consuming porn, we'd make a big dent in the business. And that's why we're talking about it this morning. And I love it when a church will talk about it, because what we keep in secret becomes a big, huge problem. But bringing it out into the open like this and starting to become accountable to each other and talking about it is what's really going to start changing some lives. Not only your own relationships, but the demand that decreases is going to help out a whole lot of people that get ruined in the industry as well. I was sitting in Playboy's office on September 11th of 2006, and they offered us a contract, another $4,000 a day, to give them a new lesbian reality series. They figured that the girls that I was recruiting were perfect for that. And on top of what we were already being paid, this was their offer. And so I leave their office, and I'm sitting there, and I prayed like I mentioned in the video, and I says, God, it doesn't seem to matter what I do, you want to bless me. Because I had this big, huge ego, I guess. I'm so important to God that he's blessing me even in porn world. And I felt that electric jolt that I mentioned in there, and I know it sounds crazy, but I'm just telling you what happened. And he was not saying that you're going to hell. He was saying, I have more for you than this. And so I couldn't do it anymore. I called up my fiance, and I says, Belinda, I have good news and I have bad news. And the good news is we have another $4,000 a day. The bad news, though, is that I can't do it anymore. And she thought I was totally out of my mind. But I wasn't ready to give God my life, and I started bargaining with him on the rest of the drive. And he wasn't in the bargaining mood. I was just like, God, if you answer all these questions I have about religion, I'll give you my life. And there was silence. And it was a miserable 2 weeks. So I was finally getting it 2 weeks later, saying, God, I feel like you just want me to give you my life now, and then trust you to provide answers if I need them. And so I surrendered my life to God, and the very next day, I called Craig Gross that evening, and the very next day, J.R. Mann, one of their pastors on staff, flew out from Michigan to spend time with me. And I knew, leave that up there for a while, I knew that life was not going to be easy because I hadn't saved any money. I was my ex-wife's sole support, because just because I ruined her life, I still had a heart for my son, and I wanted to keep his mother at home with him because she'd always dreamed of being a stay-at-home mom. So I'm really scared. I know I'm going to lose everything I own, and I started doing that. I didn't know how I'd support her. Belinda, the girl here, was my fiance. We produced together, and she quickly left with this guy over here, who's a manager at Playboy. And when she left, I had her take everything because I didn't want any of it. It was bought with porn money. I kept my personal belongings, and that's about it. Photos of my son, sentimental stuff. So I'm living in this big, huge, empty house with nothing in it, no girlfriend, all alone, crying my eyes out, having these nights where I cry until I puke, finally wearing myself out enough to sleep for a few hours, and waking up and the process started again. And I was visiting my son one day, and my ex-wife noticed that something had to be wrong by the way I looked. And she says, what's going on? And I told her, I can't share with you what I'm going through. It's just not fair for me to tell you after all I've done to you. And she coaxed it out of me anyway. And she says, you know what? Let me share with you what helped me. Basically, she was saying, when you were ripping my heart out, I want to share with you what Jesus did in my life and how I made it through. And I was blown away by that because you don't know what I've done to this woman. And her family came around me, and they started being Jesus in skin too. And Craig Gross from Triple X Church, they start telling people, Christians all over the country, my story, and they start praying for me, and checks start showing up in the mail for Wendy, in Wendy's mailbox. I wouldn't take a penny for myself, but Wendy was for 3 months without missing a bill. Because people were being Jesus. And I'm so overwhelmed by this, and I'm feeling God's presence every day, and the tears didn't stop, but I started seeing them different. I started seeing them as this time to relate to God and to pour my heart out and to kind of cleanse my soul of all this evil that I'd been doing for the last 9 years. And I had these amazing communion times with God. And I started this 19-day fast with J.R. Mann, the pastor that had flown out. And I said, J.R., I don't even really know why I'm fasting, but I'm just doing it because you're doing it. But I'm trusting that something's going to come out of it. And 3 days into it, God gives me this idea for a new business. And now I manage and market auto dealer websites. I get traffic to their websites. And it's nowhere near as interesting content to some people, but the same principles apply, and the checks usually cash. And that's a good thing. I say usually because the economy for car dealers is kind of shaky right now. but it's still good. And I'm enrolled in seminary, and guess who's paying for that? Triple X Church. My mind is being rewired, and Jesus is showing up, and I'm finding a Jesus now who does not ask us to do things because he wants a reason to send us to hell when we don't. I find a Jesus who doesn't ask us to wait until we're married to have sex because he wants to punish us when we don't. I find a Jesus who asks that because he says, I know how you're wired. I know the way that you guys work. I made you. And all these emotional bonds that you form and this baggage that you get, wouldn't it be a lot better if you just wait? Because when you're married, your wife doesn't have to worry if you're thinking of someone else or if she was better than her, or you don't have to worry if she's been with better and all this other baggage that comes into it. I know. I wish you'd just trust me. I've given you free will. You could do whatever you want, but I wish that you would just trust me. And we still don't get it, and so we mess up a lot. And you know what he does? He picks us back up. It's like a parent when their child's learning to walk, and the child falls down 3 or 4 times. The parent doesn't say, I don't think this walking thing's for you. You should probably, just crawl the rest of your life. And I found out that Jesus isn't like that either, which I always thought that he was looking for a reason to just throw me in hell. He just reaches down too, like that parent, and picks me back up and says, let's continue. And I found out that I'm not alone. Because even in Romans, where Paul, Mr. Super Christian, who wrote half the New Testament, he admits that he struggles too. He writes this letter to the Romans, and he knows that they're going to ask him this question. So he says in Romans 7, I like the Message version because it's really clear. Romans 7, starting in 14. I can anticipate the response that's coming. I know the question that you're going to ask. I know that all God's commands are spiritual, but I'm not. Isn't this also your experience? And Paul answers, yeah, I'm full of myself. After all, I've spent a long time in sin's prison. What I don't understand about myself is that I decide one way, but then I act another, doing things I absolutely despise. So if I can't be trusted to figure out what is best for myself and then do it, it becomes obvious that God's command is necessary. But I need something more. For if I know the law but still can't keep it, and if the power of sin within me keeps sabotaging my best intentions, I obviously need help. I realize that I don't have what it takes. I can will it, but I can't do it. I decide to do good, but I don't really do it. I decide not to do bad, but then I do it anyway. My decisions, such as they are, don't result in actions. Something has gone wrong deep within me, and it gets the better of me every time. And it happens so regularly, it's predictable. The moment I decide to do good, sin is there to trip me up. I truly delight in God's commands, but it's pretty obvious that not all of me joins in that delight. Parts of me covertly rebel, and just when I least expect it, they take charge. I've tried everything and nothing helps. I'm at the end of my rope. Is there no one who can do anything for me? Isn't that the real question? The answer, thank God, is that Jesus Christ can and does. He acted to set things right in this life of contradictions, where I want to serve God with all my heart and mind, but am pulled by the influence of sin to do something totally different. And that's Mr. Super Christian admitting his struggles. And that gives me a whole lot of hope. Because all of us wouldn't be here, most likely, if he hadn't done the work that he did. And he still had problems all the time. He's still constantly struggling. And you know what the answer was? Jesus, falling in love with Jesus. Which seems so simple, but it's so true. It's like, you know what? When you meet a woman for the first time, things in your life change just because you want to present a better presentation. And it's the same way with Jesus. When you really fall in love with him, things in your life just change. And I started learning that. People ask all the time, how do I get over this particular struggle with porn? And there are 3 steps to it. And they're very biblical. They're tell God, tell others, and turn away. And what does that mean? Telling God. First of all, he wants us to come clean. He knows. He's seen it. Everything. I talk to God like he's my best friend. Sometimes when I'm angry, I say words to God I probably shouldn't. But you know what? He's heard them anyway. It's not something that's new to him. So we first go to God and we're very bluntly honest with what we're doing. Because he wants us to actually see that inside of ourselves. And he says, now I've got something to work with. So we tell God. And then he wants us to become accountable to somebody else. People in your life who are not going to condemn you when you come to them and you tell them your struggles. Could be a pastor, could be a friend, but someone who is going to help you. Because we're not supposed to be in this alone. So we tell God and we tell others. Triple X Church has an accountability software. It's free to download. You download it to your computer, and when you first install it, it asks for 2 names of people. These are going to be your accountability partners. And you probably want to tell them that you're putting them down, because when they start getting these reports, they need to know that they're coming. And it kind of sends them a report of every questionable website that you go to. And it's not there to condemn you. It's there to start conversations so that you can hold each other accountable. And you can turn it off anytime that you want. But when you do, it's going to send them a report. It'll say something like, at 12:03 a.m., after his wife had gone to bed, Pastor Scott turned off the stopwatch. So you call him the next morning and you ask him why he did that. And it starts a conversation. Let's meet for coffee. How's your wife? How's your kids? Let's just talk. Let's just be real with each other. And stop pretending like we have to be all that. Tell God, tell others, and turn away. And what does that mean? That means that we make a decision that we just don't want to do this anymore. We've got to be real about that. Because sometimes when I'm involved in some of the things that trip me up, which, by the way, one of them is alcohol, because in that lifestyle I love vodka and Red Bull. Red Bull will keep you awake, and the vodka just smashes you, and you have just a big old party. And so when I have this desire to kind of feel that again, I need to become accountable to somebody. But I need to seek the face of Jesus in order to get to the place where that doesn't even become an issue in my life, because I love him so much, I don't want to do it anymore. And that's what I mean by turn away. Seek Jesus' face. Tell God, tell others, and turn away. Pastor Scott.